And carbohydrates are going to be examples of polymers. So organic molecules again, and examples of polymers. Okay, carbohydrates. You guys have probably heard about them before, so we're just going to kind of talk about what they're actually like on a chemical structure, and then we'll look later at what they do in your body. Carbohydrates, so they're always made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and there is a specific ratio that you will find them in every carbohydrate, which is 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. And you can see in that rightmost part, there's kind of like a formula for it there. So they're always going to be the form like CH2O. And then there's a little N on the outside, so that can be whatever number. I'm just going to hand these quizzes back while you guys write this slide. Forgot to write down. So the monomers of carbohydrates, we call those monosaccharides. So this is just another piece of terminology here. So the small subunit parts of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. And an example of that we'll talk about a lot when we're talking about the human body is glucose. They are simple sugars, and they're used by all organisms as a source of energy. Do you guys remember what energy is? ATP, yeah. And where is it produced? Mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. So glucose is actually, and we'll look at how this happens, but glucose is turned into energy as ATP. And it's a monomer of carbohydrate. And then when we join those monomers together, and we've got 2, we call it a disaccharide. You guys know di means 2, right? Yeah. So mono 1, di 2. 2 glucoses are 1 maltose. So sometimes we want to store glucose for later, and we can store it in disaccharides or bigger carbohydrates even. Okay. And carbohydrates are actually the main source of energy in the human body. Have you guys seen the breakdown of how many carbohydrates, fats, and proteins you're supposed to eat throughout the day, like the percentages? Carbohydrates is actually recommended to be the largest of those. I think it's around 60%. I'm going to go Google Facts check this right now. Yeah, 45 to 65% is what Canada Health Guide recommends your diet is of carbs. So 45 to 65% of kind of three main things: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So it's the main source of energy. You need a lot of it. And polysaccharides, which we'll talk about, can serve as energy storage. And what is a polysaccharide? Oh, yeah. So we're going to talk about disaccharides for a minute. So disaccharides, you guys can remember saccharides means sugar, di means two, so two sugars. And then polysaccharides, poly means many. Again, saccharides is sugar. So we've got disaccharides are two sugars, polysaccharides are many sugars. Both of those are too large to enter the bloodstream. So we have to actually break them down into monosaccharides, one sugar, and those can be absorbed. And there's a lot of examples of this in your body, but right as soon as food enters your mouth, you start the process of breaking it down chemically. So in your mouth, you have something called salivary amylase, which is an enzyme, and it's a chemical that breaks starch into maltose. So a polysaccharide into a disaccharide. That goes from your mouth into your stomach and then into your small intestine, where it's then broken down by another enzyme into two glucoses, monosaccharides, which can then be absorbed into your bloodstream. We do a lot of breaking things down and putting them back together and breaking them down in our bodies. Oh yeah, this will be on the Google Classroom. So if you guys are wanting to look at it later, it's there. And if you miss writing something down, don't worry too much. So yeah, I've got kind of like a flow of a couple things that are broken down. So you guys can see on the very top of this chart is polysaccharide, many sugars. Second row is disaccharides, and the bottom is monosaccharides. So we eat starch. In our mouth, an enzyme called amylase breaks it into maltose, which is a disaccharide. And then in our small intestine, another enzyme called maltase breaks it into glucose, which is a monosaccharide. Sucrose is another one that's a disaccharide that is broken down by an enzyme in your body called sucrase. And that is broken into glucose and fructose. We break a lot of things down to glucose and use that as energy. Is anybody lactose intolerant? Does anybody know anybody who is? Yeah. A lot of people, I'm lactose intolerant too. A lot of people are. And what that means when you're lactose intolerant is that you can't do this step here of breaking lactose into glucose and galactose. So many words. So you don't have that lactase, which is an enzyme. So lactase in the middle here. is an enzyme that's in your small intestine. It takes lactose and breaks it down into glucose. If you can't do that, you get all like bloating and gross if you drink stuff with lactose in it. Yep.
What is the word after enzyme?
The word after enzyme? Oh, amylase. So that's that one right there. So it's an example. Amylase is an example of an enzyme. Yeah, so it's the one that's in your mouth that breaks down the starch. Does that make sense to you guys? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of terminology. All of this is mostly going to be important in our digestive system when we kind of do that unit. So it's just terminology that we're going to see later. Can I go to the this is just an example of the the monosaccharide, disaccharide, and then polysaccharide of something. So glucose is like the smallest unit, so monosaccharide, a single sugar, so it's like one ring of carbon and hydrogen stuff. And then if two glucoses bind together, they're a maltose. And then if a whole bunch of those bind together, they're a starch, which is a polysaccharide. Okay, polysaccharide stuff specifically.
Sorry, should I give you this back already? No quiz?
Yeah.
No, did we give you quiz back?
I'm giving this back. I think yours might be the one with me.
No, mine was an email.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, this is your email. Oh, there we go. I just missed yours. I just like lost yours. I was like, oh, maybe yours is on that. Okay. Poly again, many saccharide, sugar. So yeah, as we saw on the previous page, it's just a whole bunch of monosaccharides joined together in a huge chain. And we kind of split them into two groups. We split them into storage. We split them into structural. And so there's storage polysaccharides and there's structural polysaccharides. Storage polysaccharides are things that we store for energy later. So starch is an example, glycogen is an example, and those will come up as we talk about digestion, kind of over and over again. So we can store energy in those forms. And they're later going to be involved in the mitochondria and making ATP for energy. Structural polysaccharides are part of an organism, so part that actually builds an organism. So cellulose is an example of that. So it's this big chain of sugars, and it actually makes cells have structure. So it's a polysaccharide. It's structural. It gives plants structure. And cellulose is kind of a cool one. And yeah, the three most common ones that we're going to kind of talk about are starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So that's two storage ones and one structural one. Are your brains exploding with terminology yet?
No, I'm not processing.
It's just not even registering yet. Yeah, you guys might need to read these a couple times. Okay. Here's just a closer up version of this image on the bottom here. So this is cellulose. So you guys can see there's cellulose molecules on the left here. They form a chain polysaccharide cellulose, and then they actually make up the cell wall. So you guys know how you've looked at cells under the microscope before, and you've seen that they have like this beautiful cell wall where animal cells are kind of like blobby and don't really have structure. That's because of cellulose. So there's lots of that in plants. Okay, we're going to talk about all three, so starch, glycogen, and cellulose. I'll let you guys write this down and then I'll chat for a bit. Okay, just sign over there. Me too. So starches are mostly, it's just like a straight chain of glucose. So glucose is what we're going to use to produce ATP, reaction in the mitochondria. And starch is just kind of like a big, mostly straight chain with one or two branches off of it. And it just provides a reserve of those glucose molecules. So that's great. It's helpful. Glycogen. We use glycogen as an energy storage. So we don't want to use all of our energy at the same time. So your body actually will store it as glycogen. So it's a really highly branched polymer. So our starch is like kind of a big long chain with like a couple branches. Glycogen is just like branching all over the place. And the liver and your muscles store it in that form as glycogen. So insulin actually tells your body to store glucose as glycogen in the liver. And you're going to have a reserve of glucose, which is great because then you can produce ATP later. And you've got a way to kind of save your energy and like not burn everything at once, right? Are any of you runners or like hardcore athletes? Yeah. Have you ever just like gone really, really hard at something and then just like totally hit a wall and been like, I can't even do anything? Yeah. I know, like 3 kilometers, right? No. Yeah, so what's happening when you actually hit that wall is you're running out of glycogen. So you run out of glycogen, which is stored in your muscles and your liver, and you don't have any reserve energy left, and you just like hit a wall. It can happen so suddenly. And that's why it's important to, when you've got people who are doing like ultra marathons and there's stations and they get like little bits of sugar bursts to eat or whatever. You can start saying that when you're feeling lazy. I can't do it. I'm out of glycogen. Next test. Sorry, I can't write the test. I'm out of glycogen today. Just with my fingers. You don't have any paper? Okay. Do you want a piece of blank paper? Or?
I have papers. I'm going to use another sheet.
Oh. Cellulose. So this is the one that's not a storage one. This is a structural one, right? It's really important. It forms cell walls. We saw that little thing that I showed you earlier. We can't digest cellulose, but some animals can. Have you heard of this before? You sounded really excited. Oh, have you heard of this before? Oh, you're excited about digesting cellulose too. Yeah. It's actually really cool. Do any of you guys have a pet rabbit?
I think
You've had 3. This is kind of gross. Have you guys ever noticed them eating their own poop?
dogs do that.
Yeah, dogs do too. Yeah.
So you have a rabbit.
Yeah. We essentially got a rabbit dog. We're gonna talk about cows and sheep, but we'll talk about why rabbits actually eat their own poop. It has to do with cellulose.
Why did dogs do it?
I think dogs just do it because they're gross. No, I don't know. No, I read a book a while ago, and it was about your microbiome and like all of the bacteria in your digestive system, and it mentioned caprophagy, which is the official term for poop eating. And I think I remember it saying something about when dogs and other animals eat their or others' poop, they actually get some gut bacteria replenished. I don't know. Kind of gross. So they're really smart. Iguanas do that?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, my dog ate it.
Your dog eats iguanas?
Oh, their dog. And she's like 6 pounds, and he used to eat like 5 pounds of water.
Wow. That's impressive.
I wouldn't
And
brush
I
it.
sweat.
Oh my gosh, this is some weird dog. So we've got one thing is ruminants. So ruminants is kind of a term that we use to classify certain animals that have this specific digestive system. So I've just got an image of our digestive system. So the human, not our whole digestive system, but our stomach on the left. So you've got like a tube that goes into your stomach, and then you've got another tube coming out, and you've got one chamber there, right? On the right is a cow stomach. So you've got the esophagus coming in, and then you've got 4 different chambers, and then you've got the small intestine going out. So what ruminants do is they have got this rumen, so you guys can see that's labeled on there, the first chamber that the food goes into, and it has got a whole bunch of bacteria in it. So it's not like how our stomach is, where everything just goes straight into this like hydrochloric acid like mess. Not that it's a mass, it's great. But it goes into this chamber that's just like filled with bacteria, and those bacteria actually break down and digest cellulose for them. Yeah, so that's ruminants, and they sometimes, have you seen cows like kind of like almost like throw up in their mouths a little bit, and like chew it some more and then swallow it again? Yeah, so they kind of do that over and over again through the rumen to digest the cellulose. Hindgut fermenters, so this is our rabbits. So this is going to be why rabbits are growing. Some rodents as well. They've got this thing called the cecum. So you guys can see on the this diagram, most of this is like, I mean, it's all important, but we're talking right now about this thing right here. The cecum. That has got a whole bunch of good bacteria in it, and those break down cellulose. So same thing as the cow, but it's in their large intestine. So the thing about where your large intestine is, you're not actually absorbing nutrients really there anymore. Nutrients kind of get absorbed in the small intestine, which is before the large intestine. So for rabbits, it's like this cellulose goes all the way through them, and then it gets broken down, and then they poop it out, and it doesn't get absorbed. So they'll eat their first poop of the day, and that is then going to be able to have the cellulose broken down and be absorbed in their small intestine. But then they won't eat that because that has then, they've already gotten all of the cellulose broken down out of that. So they're actually pretty clever. It's kind of clever, isn't it? Yeah, it's a bit word complication. We don't have either of those things. We don't have a rumen or a cecum. The cecum? No, they've got a stomach before their cecum. So it kind of goes like stomach, small intestine, large intestine, the cecum. And what we actually have an appendix, right? You guys all have appendixes. So that might be an evolutionary like leftover. Maybe we used to have a cecum, but now it's just kind of like a little bubble off of your intestine, and you can't digest cellulose. Okay. Last one here, and then I'm going to let you guys go. So others, just humans and other mammals, we don't have the ability to digest cellulose, but food that has cellulose in it has lots of we call it fiber or roughage. And it's important to have fiber in your diet because it just keeps things moving in your intestines, and it like keeps your poop regular. It's good stuff. So we do need it, but we don't actually absorb anything from it. Does anybody have any questions around any of that? Yeah. Birds, yeah. Yeah, good question. So birds actually have another stomach. Well, not like really stomach, but it's like another compartment. And they'll actually swallow rocks. And the rocks will stay in that little stomach, and they'll grind stuff up. And then it goes into a second stomach that's more like ours. And I don't think they can actually break down cellulose. Yeah, no, I don't think they can break down cellulose. I'll double check that though. Yeah, guys, I am just gonna